Welcome, everybody, to our Tuesday evening chat with two rabbis. It is August 17th, and we are lucky to have Rabbi Barry Silver as our rabbi, our spiritual leader of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor, and our guest, Rabbi Loring J. Frank of the All Peoples Synagogue. I'm thrilled to have you tonight. Take it away, gentlemen. This is being recorded. Thank you.
I would say, instead of saying lucky, Sharon, since we're the synagogue, let's say we're blessed to have one another.
That too.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for organizing the meeting, for being the technical director of this, and for bringing us all together for this wonderful occasion. Always a pleasure to be here with Rabbi Frank. He is one of the most eloquent and one of the best tanned rabbis in the community, and it is a lot of fun to have him with us. This is an interesting passage that we're reading from Ki Teitzei, and then we'll talk a little bit about current events and anything else that you would like to speak about. As I always do, I turn it over to our guest, and Rabbi Frank, I'll turn it over to you to kick off the discussion about the Torah passage or current events or whatever else you would like. Take it away.
Rabbi Silver, thank you very much. L'Dor Va-Dor congregation, our synagogue, All Peoples Synagogue. What a delight and an honor to be with you this glorious evening. Blessings to you. Baruch haba, b'shem Adonai. Blessed are you, dear family and dear friends. Blessed are you. We have come together today with the spirit of love in our hearts, and I know with bringing our traditions to the focus in our hearts. And we've all brought the presence of the Almighty to our wonderful gathering, and you are acknowledged, everyone, for being with us. And especially blessed Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechayanu v'kimanu v'higyanu lazman hazeh. How wonderful it is if families and friends can be together, celebrating together in our traditions of life. And let us say once again, Amen, Amen. You know, our beautiful Torah portion, Rabbi Silver, please assist, if you will. Our Torah reading, sedra Ki Teitzei. Doesn't it mean to come out, to exit, to evolve ourselves, Rabbi?
Yeah, when you leave. It's related to the word motzi. Motzi means to bring out bread from the earth. Ki Teitzei, when you leave, when you go out.
Sure. So when we breathe, so we're going to bring ourselves out in the open tonight with our spirituality and discuss our Torah reading. And thank God we have all of our wonderful congregants from L'Dor Va-Dor witnessing and watching. So we look forward to your presence and your advice along the way. So Rabbi Silver, just really, I want to acknowledge you once again and share with you our Torah reading as you know it very well. In particular, one passage in our Torah reading, which I really like, and that is the parents are responsible for their children. And I shared with you the 10 Commandments last week or 2 weeks ago of our 10 Commandments of parents. And I'll share them with you in just a few moments. So also what we like is our Torah reading that says that when one finds property, that it's our responsibility to do whatever we can to return that property to the rightful owner, even if it's someone you don't care about, you don't like, or you don't have respect for. It's still our obligation to return their property to them in good faith, as our ancestors have instructed us in our Torah reading. Also, Barry, you are an attorney, and you know that accident protection, it's our responsibility to protect others on our property, that we don't leave our property in a way that would cause ill will to anybody. So I know Rabbi Silver can touch upon that legally also. Kindness to animals is the most important part of our Torah reading. It's good to my heart. You know, Rabbi Silver and I were joking about the other day how we're speaking about taking good care of the animals and rescuing animals. And we got together at an event. Rabbi Silver was referring to this event. Everyone got together and they're talking about being kind to animals and to watch over them and to watch their ability to be able to take care of themselves through our help. And yet, right around the corner, people are ordering, you know, baked chicken sandwiches and and ham sandwiches and cows, and eating the cows that we're all are talking about protecting and watching over. So kindness to animals not only is just not being only able to treat them humanely, but also, in my opinion, not even to eat them. So that's another discussion that we can talk upon, Rabbi Silver. I know you're also into eating good, healthy food and being, in essence, like a vegan. Also, the other part of the Torah reading, which is very important, we'll touch upon, is being responsible and being kind to strangers and to women who have lost their husbands, to widows who have lost their husbands, and to the orphans. So we will talk about that also. And our last part of our Torah reading, which is most important too, is being honest in our business practices and making sure that we're weighing certain objects for sale, that we weigh them with an accurate scale. So it's up to us to perform all these beautiful ethical teachings and pass them on to our leaders, our children, L'Dor Va-Dor, from generation to generation. So Rabbi Silver, I just brought these points up, and let's talk about them and turn this over to our congregation.
Well, Ki Teitzei is a very interesting passage. It comes towards the end of Deuteronomy, and it's got a moral code in it. Main thing that we should take away from this is that we Jews do believe in morality. And also, this passage demonstrates better than most how there's some really advanced ethical concepts in the Torah and some extremely primitive ones side by side. You'll see some very enlightening passages that even transcend what's in our own legal system. And then you'll see some other ones that are pretty scary that would be worthy of the Taliban side by side. I think what that means to us is that within each one of us, we have some good and some bad tendencies. If we were to suggest that everything we do is perfect, we shouldn't change a thing, there's nothing to improve upon, we'd have no need for Shabbat, the high holidays, or Judaism itself. That would be a rather arrogant position to take. Similarly, we don't want to say that we're terrible, miserable people. Each one of us has within us the capacity to do some amazingly good things and some not so good things. Our job is to acknowledge both tendencies and to overcome the bad and bring out the good. I believe the same is true with the Torah in this particular passage. There's some very barbaric passages in this particular sedra, and also some very enlightened ones. I think we would do well to acknowledge the good and bad and not say this is a perfect document written by a perfect being and we should do everything it says, but recognize that if we're able to use discernment and judgment, which we talk about on the Day of Judgment, we can lead a very good life and the Torah can be a blessing. What do I mean by some good and bad? Well, let me just share a few things in the passage. As Rabbi Frank mentions, if you see an animal going astray, return it. If you see an animal suffering under the burden that it's carrying, help the animal, lift it up. Even, as Rabbi Frank says, if it belongs to your enemy. This is about as low status you can get. An animal that belongs to your enemy. That's the Bible's way of trying to tell us something. What it's saying is this sense of compassion should extend to everyone and everything. If you feel compassion towards your enemy's animal, then who wouldn't you feel compassion for? Very enlightened indeed. It says that if you come across a nest and a bird with eggs in it, and Rabbi Frank mentions being a vegetarian, you could make a case for that in Judaism. You could also make a case that Judaism is centered around eating meat, and we'll have that discussion another day. But what it says here is that if you see a bird with eggs, don't take the eggs in the sight of the mother. That would be traumatic. Shoo the bird away and then take the eggs. Now, in a more exalted position might be, don't take the mother's eggs. But this is a good first step. Don't let the mother see what you're doing. It says that certain groups of people you should not like. You should drive them out. They're bad influences. But the Edomite and the Egyptian, they're your kin. They're your brethren. Again, a good first step. Wouldn't it be nice if it said all people, as in All Peoples Synagogue, all people are brothers and sisters. We're all kin. That would be even higher. But this is a good first step. It says, don't swear falsely to God. In other words, if you take an oath, if you're in court and you take an oath, fulfill your oath. Because not only does it help adjudicate justice, it makes you look better. you become respected if you're a man of your word. It also says that you should not allow a person who just got married to be sent off to war. Why is that? This is very enlightened. Not because of the man, but because the woman should have at least 1 year of happiness in her marriage before he goes off to war and can be killed. This is a great advance towards women's rights and something that we should be proud of in our Torah. It says, don't pluck your field bare. Leave some of it for the poor and the widow. Let them come upon your land. But you're not allowed to take a doggy bag. What does that mean? It says you can pick from the vineyard, but you can't take a vessel to put things in it. You can only eat what you can eat at the time. No doggy bags allowed.
I think, Rabbi, so we should have told that to our bubbies and our grandmothers who went to Pumpernicks and the Rascal House in Miami Beach. They were taking doggy bags along, and I think most of those businesses went out of business because everything on the table, our bubbies and our grandparents to take with them.
That could be, but I would say that that's an exception because they paid for the food. They're not coming on somebody's land and taking it, but that's a good point. Now, I've mentioned some of the good passages. Let me tell you some that are not so good. It says that when you conquer a nation, you can wipe everyone out. But if you see a woman that's attractive, you can have her for your wife. But before you do, you have to cut her hair and trim her nails and go through a mourning period with her so she can mourn her husband or her father or her kids or her brothers that you just slaughtered before you marry her. And then it says if you get tired of her, you can't just cast her aside. You got to sell her to the next person because she was your wife after all, so she's entitled to be paid. It also says a passage here that I'm glad my parents never carried out. It said that you should stone a disrespectful child. Now, I was a pretty good kid, but I had my moments, and I'm glad my parents were not fundamentalists and didn't take this literally. It also says,
I don't want to interrupt, but basically back in those days, supposedly, as I've heard, that other nations and other cultures had the right to do whatever they felt appropriate to their children. And that could be even worse than, God forbid, stoning. But whatever they were allowed to do at other countries, we were limited as to our weight of punishment that we'd offer our children. So your dad probably knew that Torah reading very well and probably gave you a patch in the tachas once in a while rather than strapping you with a belt.
Unfortunately, my father didn't believe in corporal punishment. He never struck me and never raised his voice. He got us to do his bidding by respect for our parents. But I will tell you this, though. You're mentioning that, well, it could be worse, reminds me of a story about these two guys, and they're set to be hung the next day. And one of them is talking back to the jailer, and the other one says, stop doing that. You're going to make things even worse. It's like, I'm not really sure what could be worse than being stoned to death. So there are Jewish people who try to make light of this or try to make it look like, well, the other codes are even worse, but I don't really know what would be worse than stoning your own child. That's really kind of hard to imagine. It does say in this passage that each person is responsible for their own sin, and parents should not be murdered for the death of their sons and daughters, and kids shouldn't be punished for the sins of their parents. My friends, this wipes out the concept of original sin. Christian fundamentalists say Adam and Eve committed a sin and now we're held accountable for it. And therefore, that is the basis of the entire Christian religion. Jesus had to come and remove the stain. Good news. He didn't have to come after all, because they believe in Jewish scripture as God's word, and God's word says you cannot be punished for the sin of your parents, let alone some mythological figure thousands of years ago. That, my friends, is Ki Teitzei. Some extremely sublime passages, others not so much. And let us do what we can to take advantage of the justice and the morality that is the legacy and tradition of Judaism, which is based on improving every day. Go ahead, Rabbi Frank.
Congregation, it says at the ending of our Torah reading as a commentary that these are but a few of the many laws that Moses reviewed for the people, for the Israelites. He assures the Israelites that they are blessed people, and he assures them that they live by these laws or interpretation of laws in a more lenient way, as we are in our society, that they will be made a just and peaceful society. And God willing, this has been our mission as Israelites and as fellow Jews. You know, a few weeks ago, we were on the Zoom. I happened to have found a list of 10 commandments. I'll read them briefly for parents. Number 1, thou shalt earn your children's respect and not acquire it through fear. Okay, Ki Teitzei. Thou shalt not recreate your life through your children. Number 3, thou shalt give your children every opportunity to expand and express their individual personality and not smother their growth. Number 4, remember your children are human and have feelings, emotions, and problems as serious to them as your own. And by the way, when we say children, I remember years ago, my father was making a note about, there was a protest going on, and my father said, these are children, these are our children. And so some critic came up and said, these are not children, these are adults. These are adults, they're not children, they should know what they're doing. And my father said, yes, they're still our children. So you could be a child that, I'm a child to 71 to my mother who's 96. I am her child.
I think he was saying not that they're adults, but I think he was saying they were dolts, not adults.
Adults. Remember, your children are human and have feelings. And even though we say children, they are adults, but they are our children. They have emotions and feelings and problems as serious to them as our own. Number 5, thou shalt return understanding and instruction, not recrimination, when your children confide in you. Let them feel comfortable in knowing they can turn to you for encouragement and do not frighten them away. Number 6, thou shalt teach by respect and example and by precept, serving as a model and not a critic to your children. And it goes on with more details in each commandment. But number 7, thou shalt not seek perfection from your children. Number 8, thou shalt keep your word and thereby teach your children the inestimable worth of honor. Number 9, thou shalt not shield your children from the realities of life. And number 10, thou shalt teach your children there is a right and there is a wrong, and that God, not man, is the yardstick. So I'm looking forward to hearing comments, not necessarily about this, but also about our Torah reading from Rabbi Silver and our blessed congregation.
Well, these are very progressive commandments. It's interesting. The first one is that we should earn respect as parents and not demand it by fear. And as you can see, the primitive type of God from the Torah is all based on fear, but we've come a long way in Judaism and no longer see God in that way. In fact, the word in Hebrew for fear, yirah, it says that you should have fear of God. That word itself evolved from fear to a sense of awe and reverence to a sense of respect. And so now that word actually has 2 different meanings. And now we see that this incredible power that governs everything in our life, we should have reverence for it. It's similar to the evolution of the word mitzvah. Mitzvah comes from the word for command. It means a commandment, but it evolved over Jewish history to mean a good deed. Why is that? Because Jewish people today don't do these things because we think someone's commanding us and we're going to be punished. We do it because we want to be good people and we want to do good deeds. So the evolution of Judaism matches the evolution of our ethical standards. It's very interesting how a language is a window to a culture. I know that people want to talk about what's going on today in Afghanistan. I'm sure about that because I know I do. So I will turn it over to anyone else who would like to comment on the Torah reading. And then if not, I think we should certainly talk about the very sad events that are going on in Afghanistan. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share about the Torah reading? Okay. Is there anyone here who wants to share some thoughts about Afghanistan? Loring, do you want to start out?
Ask our congregation, what's happening in Afghanistan right now, according to our governmental leaders, is that it would have happened years ago, or it could happen years from now. So it doesn't make a difference whether it's in the past or the present, but certainly it shouldn't go on any longer into the future. So if we did this a few years from now under another administration, it might be the same scenario. But I want to ask, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just posing that to you, but I want to ask everyone, do you all think that Afghanistan being under the rule of the Taliban, that's going to infringe upon the security of Israel or the Jewish people around the world?
All right. Well, first, before that is answered, I just want to key in on something that you said, Rabbi Frank. You said, as you responded, according to our government leaders, and then you went on to say, well, it's going to happen anyway. The key words that you said is, according to our government leaders. We, as informed, educated citizens, must never, ever accept the version of our government leaders as gospel, especially in this case, especially when they're trying to justify what they did. Yes, according to our government leaders, this was going to happen anyway. But according to reality and objective facts and a Jewish sense of compassion and loyalty, what happened in Afghanistan is outrageous. There's a horror, and we should be deeply ashamed and hold the leaders accountable. The actions of the Biden administration is shameful in abandoning people by the thousands and underestimating the strength of the Taliban, and in blaming the Afghanistan army for failing to stand up to the Taliban when that's exactly what we did. When we pulled out, everyone knew that the Taliban would take over. It was just a matter of time. It shouldn't have been that difficult to foresee that people fighting in the Afghanistan army would recognize that they'd rather survive another day than face certain death. And so we should hold ourselves accountable for pulling out the way we did and leaving them in isolation, and for turning our back on people that helped us out along the way. What a shameful thing that was.
Well, do you think it makes a difference? I'm asking everyone that it was this administration, or would it happen if under a different administration, let's say under a Republican administration or a Democrat? Do you think it makes a difference as to who is president that this took place?
Well, look, President Trump, he's the one that set the time frame. It was his decision to get out. I'm not saying necessarily that was a wrong decision, but when you get out, you had to do it in such a way that before you get out, you take precautions to protect your people. But it was Donald Trump who said we should get out, and he'd made friends with the Taliban and invited them and said these guys told me that they're going to be nice people. But that was his habit of befriending dictators and killers and thugs and thinking they were going to behave themselves. They didn't. But this is not on him. The way that we got out is not on him. It's solely on the Biden administration. They're the ones who had the time to do something about it, and they failed miserably, and it's going to harm our country for a long time. As far as Israel's concerned, yes, this is bad for Israel and for the West and for America, because the Taliban now could set up a country where Al-Qaeda and terrorists could come out and do their training there.
Iran.
It's bad news. I wrote an article on this situation for the Jewish Journal that will be coming out. I spent a long time crafting it, and when we're done discussing it, I'll share with you what I said in the article about this whole debacle. But at this point, I'd like to hear from other people what they think.
Yes.
Emily, go ahead.
There you go.
I come at it in a different way, I think, than a lot of you. I've had two sons, a husband who served in the military. So I don't think if you haven't had dear ones who have served in the military, you are not entitled to say that you would send your children or yourself to Afghanistan. I think it was a losing proposition. It was a losing proposition for Genghis Khan, who lost his grandson fighting the Afghans in 1200. It was a losing proposition for the British. It was a losing proposition for USSR. It's a losing proposition for us. And I, for one, would not like one more American boy to die in Afghanistan. That being said, you're right, Rabbi. Biden underestimated the Taliban, and he should have arranged for a much more efficient evacuation of anyone who had helped us. Again,
Thank you very much.
well, he was wrong. I still would not want to send more of my family. Would you want to send your boys over there?
Well, by the way, I never suggested that we should have sent anybody over in the first place. That was not my position. My position was, if we did have people that we sent over and we fought for 20 years, that we had some obligation not to just cut and run when we had allies that had worked with us. And so that was, by the way, the military, and I'm not basing this just on me, I've never served, but people who have served, military leaders and generals, they also expressed the same thing. They were appalled that their friends and allies that they worked with were abandoned and are going to be killed. So the military people themselves have condemned this and have been very critical of the withdrawal, the way it was done. He
was not considering the veracity of the tribal chiefs who are extremely strong and extremely militant. The topography of the area, which is very mountainous and difficult to deal with, and the history. Biden definitely erred in this case.
Yeah, and even like 10 days ago, he was saying this won't be like South Vietnam. Everything's under control. Apparently, he didn't have any idea what he was talking about, because the experts told him that this is going to be bad news. So it's just a really sad day.
To think what's happening to the women and the men who were fighting in the Afghan army, it's heartbreaking, because when they do, I heard some articles, when they do surrender, they're shot on the spot, killed immediately when they surrender. So now it's a question of blending into society and keeping your mouth shut, so to speak, and not be found out who you are, what you believe, but to fall in the line, and that way you won't be killed.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard to hide. Everybody knows who was who, and it's going to be really hard to hide. Anybody else?
Women?
Yes.
Yes.
What I don't understand is this guy who calls himself the president of the United States of America. The buck stops here. He was also the vice president 2 administrations ago, where an identical situation took place. The withdrawal from Iraq that created a vacuum, and everybody knows the ISIS calamity that ensued was a nightmare. And here we go, 2 administrations later, same guy, now he's the president, didn't learn from the Iraq situation. Yeah. I don't understand.
I think I have some understanding of what went through Biden's mind. Biden has been opposed to the Afghanistan war for a long time, and rightly so. And because he was opposed, he started seeing the world differently to make it appear the way he wanted it to. So because he wanted out, he tried to make himself believe, and he said, don't worry, if we go out, the army's going to be able to be okay. They'll do fine. He wanted to believe that, and so he started to believe his own rhetoric as an excuse for getting out. He also should have seen what happened a couple of years ago under Trump, when we abandoned the Kurds and they were allowed to be slaughtered by the Turks. This also was a horrible thing for American prestige. So now we've abandoned the Kurds, we've abandoned our allies in Afghanistan. This is really, really bad for America's credibility.
Let me ask you,
right. Biden should have seen this coming from long ago.
Do you think that Biden, I'm just asking, I'm not suggesting, do you think Biden was swayed or encouraged by his vice president and by some of the Congress people, the squad, so to speak? I'm just saying it actually, do you think that they encouraged him to do this?
It could be. There's a lot of liberals that are clueless about the threat of Islam, and they might have encouraged him, but he seems to me pretty independent of those folks. So I don't think they really had much influence, because they certainly haven't influenced him on other issues. I think he personally has been opposed to the war in Afghanistan for a very long time, and rightly so. And so I don't think he needed encouragement from anyone else. Anybody else want to share some thoughts?
How about if we can make this a little tempered? If we say the money that we're saving each year, whether it be hundreds of billions of dollars that we're saving each year but not spending there, if we put it into the support of our country, whether it be in the infrastructure, whether it be helping out, our people who are less fortunate, does that make it a little more sweeter for us to think about?
Well, I think the issue is not so much whether we should have got out or stayed. Reasonable minds can differ. It's the way it was done and the slaughter that's going to take place now. That's a separate issue. Should we have stayed forever or kept staying or leave? That's a different issue. It's just the way it was done that was particularly reprehensible. But I'm glad to entertain any discussion if anybody wants to talk about whether we should have gone or stayed, or the war itself, or how we got out. Any other takers on this? Go ahead, Valerie.
Well, this country, unfortunately, has a long history of screwing up. In my lifetime alone, Bay of Pigs, Vietnam, Korea, the Kurds, Iraq. I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. The problem that I see, again, is when you start to vote and start to elect people, you need to listen to what they say. I don't believe that we should go to war under any circumstances unless it's the absolute ultimate way to resolve an issue. Every means that we have at our disposal should be used to resolve any conflict, no matter what it is. However, having said that, once the decision is made to send your military forces in, the politicians have to get the hell out of the way and let the military do their job. The military are not policemen. They're not teachers. They're not educators. Okay, they're not nurses or doctors or good Samaritan. They are trained to go in, kill, take property, hold it, and secure the area. That's what our military is trained to do. So when we go into a conflict, unfortunately, from my personal experience in just observing, when we go in, we have to know what we're going in to do, what we're supposed to accomplish, and what is our exit strategy. End of discussion. And that has really never been very clearly defined in my lifetime in any of these conflicts that we have really had issues with. That's my perspective.
Valerie, I just want to let you
that the military, generally speaking, what I've been reading about, is totally opposed to pulling out the way we did. Just military people alone are saying that.
No, I don't say we shouldn't have pulled out at all, but hear what I'm saying, yes. Rabbi Frank. What I'm saying is that we have a history of dropping the ball after we make the decision to go in.
Right.
And once we go in, we don't have a clearly defined way of doing what we do, what is our mission, and when do we get out. It goes on and on.
I understand. I'm just saying to you that the military, if you were just speaking to military people, they would say we made a mistake to pull out. That's what I'm saying. That's
the way they went out, not that they went in, the way they came out.
Of course.
We are not nation builders. We have been told on numerous occasions by various administrations that we are no longer nation builders. Afghanistan has never, ever been a democracy. It has always been fiefdoms. That's their culture. That's their way of life. And we just have this thing that everybody should live the way we live. Well, not everybody does live the way we live. Okay. And we have to realize that. And unfortunately, our elected officials don't get that.
Yeah.
I want to share something from the Jewish perspective. And that is that the point you make, Valerie, is 100% consistent with the Jewish point of view, that we should never go to war unless it's absolutely the last resort. That Jews love peace and we believe in peace. And Israel has been provoked repeatedly The only time they've ever fought back is out of absolute necessity. And they've always reached out their hand in friendship and tried to make friends. And they have been able to sign treaties with people who are trying to destroy them. So I compliment you on reflecting Jewish values in always trying to find an alternative to war. And I do agree with you also on your point that politicians don't do well when they try to make medical decisions, military decisions, environmental decisions. They should rely on expert opinions, and they clearly didn't do that. There are many military people who thought we should have stayed, and there are many military people who thought we should have got the heck out a long time ago. But there's no military people that think we got out in the right way. They're all pretty much appalled at that. Anybody else?
I just want to just mention that the only reason why we were there, from what I understood, is that we're chasing after bin Laden years ago, and he was supposedly hiding in the mountains, and Bush went in to flush him out.
It wasn't just that. He was the direct threat that we were going after, but we're also concerned that the Taliban running Afghanistan would be a breeding ground for other terror groups, and that the whole country could breed all types of terrorists and groups. So we wanted to get rid of the Taliban so that that wouldn't be a breeding ground for terrorism. But the terrorists just went other places and hid out for a while, and now they're back again. Anybody else? Harris, go ahead.
The good news is there was only one Jew left in Afghanistan, and he said he was going to go to Israel, and he lived in the only synagogue in Kabul. So we're all right with the Jews.
Did he get out safely?
He said he was going to leave about a month ago to go to Israel.
Leave it to Harris. Leave it to Harris to find the.
How did you know that?
I don't know if you know about that Jew who was there in Afghanistan, though, Harris. I don't know if you read this in the newspaper. He actually had two synagogues. There was one synagogue where he went to pray, and the other synagogue he wouldn't set his foot into.
Yeah, right, exactly. Sounds like a couple synagogues around town here too, right?
But the key issue is, after Russia spent so many years there and they got out, that should have been the signal to the United States. They spent about 10 years there. They got out. We should have never gone in. That's the bottom
I
line.
bet there's a lot of side deals going on that we don't even know about. So, for example, one of the terrorist leaders was released from American prison a few years ago too. I guess you know about that. Became a big Taliban leader now. We had him in prison and we released him under a trade deal. I guess you know about that.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Right now, the Taliban is allowing China and Russia to have their embassies in the new caliphate, okay? What does that tell you?
Well, they might allow us to do it too. The question is, are we going to do it?
Don't hold your breath.
I don't.
We have to do a deal. They would probably say, if you get the American embassy out of Jerusalem, then we can open up one in Afghanistan. Good luck with that deal too.
All you gotta do is give them money. That's what we do. We give people money and they like us. That's what this country does, okay? That's what this country does. We went ahead and, and you know, Rabbi Barry, you mentioned something about Israel, you know, Israel goes in and they do surgical attacks. They go in, they have a very defined objective. They go in, they accomplish that objective, and they get the hell out. Israel doesn't stay where it's not supposed to be. They see the threat, they neutralize the threat, and they get the hell out of there. And we haven't learned that yet.
And then Israelites or Israelis are considered to be terrorists because they did that. Can't win.
Well, the Israelis are pretty smart. They did go against that policy sometimes. In Lebanon, they hung out in southern Lebanon for a while, and then they realized the mistake and they got the heck out of there.
Yeah.
And they also abandoned the Gaza Strip, which I think they probably should have stuck around in that place. But you're right, Valerie. They know better. They usually do a surgical strike, like they did in Iraq and Syria when they took out the nuclear reactors. They came in, destroyed the reactor, and then they got out. They were condemned by the world community, but they saved us from perhaps a nuclear holocaust.
Maybe
So
we can turn the rest over to the Israelis now to do something with Afghanistan. We'll let that nature and history.
They're not that stupid.
No, Valerie, you're absolutely right about the fact that we are deficient in not having an exit strategy. And part of the reason we didn't have an exit strategy is our military industrial complex makes money. And that's what it's all about. It's the industry that's making all this, the armaments, the tanks, the planes, etc., that the military people who are not pure strategists, but thinking of growing the Pentagon and growing the military, don't want to have diminished.
Well, they're going to have a wonderful time because we left all of our military equipment there. So they're going to
Yeah.
have to start inventing more stuff. That's another stupid thing. Give it, like or not like, what Trump said, and he said it because I have it recorded. He said, when we pull out, we are not going to leave a nail there.
I
That's what
remember
he
that.
said. I have it taped. And that's because we have a habit of doing that too. We leave the enemy all of our equipment and then wonder why we get it up the you-know-what every single time.
Now I'm going to share with you some of what I wrote in my article. So it'll be anticlimactic if you read it, but I hope you will read it. It's available in the Jewish Journal online edition as right now, and it'll come out in print in about a week. So I write these articles and then they come out in print quite a bit later. I did make this observation. When my wife was pregnant with our first child, the United States was attacked on 9/11. She was pregnant with Ari. And I guess made a vow to myself. I would never teach my kids to have blind faith in any supernatural beings because it only leads to trouble. And so 20 years later, we're still fighting in Afghanistan. We spent $300 million a day for 20 years. 300 million a day for 20 years, that's over $2 trillion. And we've lost many, many thousands of people. And you read about the people that we lost. 3,000 here, 4,000 workers. What you don't hear so much about is the tens of thousands of people maimed and the hundreds of thousands of families that are destroyed because their father, their husband, their loved one comes back horribly injured or doesn't come back at all. So you have this incredible price that we've paid fighting in Afghanistan. And I ask you this, in all that time, has anyone ever asked, why are these people fighting against us? Has anyone ever thought to try to figure out what is motivating them? What's the cause of this? I've never heard it. I watch news a lot.
Well, I've heard the underlying drug war going on with the control of the drugs.
That's not it. That's not why these people are fighting us.
Okay.
The reason why they're fighting us and the reason why they attacked on 9/11 is because of Islam. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
I thought you were talking about Afghanistan in itself. Yeah, exactly. Of course it's Islam.
So Islam is the reason why we've been fighting for 20 years. What we don't realize is we are not just fighting on a battlefield. We are fighting a battle of ideology, and we refuse to acknowledge it, and we refuse to engage in the battle, but they don't. They're fighting that battle, we're not. And so we have a president, President Biden, who looks militarily. He looks at the military and he says, I think Afghanistan could do it without us. What he doesn't realize is there's an ideology in the Taliban that is motivating them to recruit and to kill, and the army doesn't have that ideology.
You think Trump had feeling about that too? He knew about the ideology? Trump? You think Trump had that?
I think he had what?
The fact that they were fighting against the Islamic rulers, Islamic terrorists, and he referred to all the time. That was never referred to under the Obama administration. There was never Islamic terrorists. It was all Islam.
I believe that President Trump was more willing to discuss who we were fighting and why. It wasn't a war on terror. Terror is a tactic. It doesn't describe who you're fighting against. But the problem with President Trump is that he described it in such ridiculous terms and he had no credibility. So he said, all the Muslims aren't allowed in, ignoring the fact that there are some Muslims who actually are fighting against other Muslims. We're fighting an ideology, not just in Afghanistan. We remember the war in Iraq we fought for a long time? Same reason. Remember that we've been fighting in Syria? Same reason. We're fighting a battle of ideologies, and we refuse to acknowledge it. And we also refuse to acknowledge this. The ideology of Islam comes out of Deuteronomy in the passage that we were just reading about killing non-believers. How do you deal with that? I suggest this. The Jewish people should say, look at this passage, Ki Teitzei. We've got some beautiful things in it, some wonderful sentiments about caring for animals, caring for people, caring for the poor. Let's share that with the world. And let's say, but in our more primitive days, we also had these passages about killing other people, non-believers. We as Jews reject it. We as Jews reject those passages. This is not coming from God. And it's not coming from God in our Bible, in your Quran, or Christian scripture. So let's all agree to transcend that. And once we wage that battle, then we have a fighting chance of overcoming the opposition in Afghanistan, Iraq, and throughout the Muslim world. Let us make friends with the Muslim community and suggest to them that they also should repudiate these things and adopt the more loving passages. I believe that's the only long-term strategy that's going to work, because we fought for 20 years and fighting militarily is not sufficient. Now, I do believe that we do have to fight militarily very often, like with getting rid of Al-Qaeda and dealing with Hamas and dealing with these other horrible actors. But I believe that we should take out these people surgically, the really bad ones, and the rest of them deal with by trying to engage in an ideological discussion. And that's what we do at L'Dor Va-Dor. We engage in that discussion. We try to encourage rational thought, and we try to encourage looking at the Torah and all holy books in a rational way.
You know,
I
Rabbi,
think that's the only way we're going to accomplish anything in this struggle.
on the side of the our Torah reading is the Haftorah reading from the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah says that if we do all these laws and rules and regulations and follow the customs of what Moses suggested to being kind to animals by walking justly, Isaiah says there will be great love once more between God and his people, and there shall be renewed a covenant of peace if we follow these rules and affirmations of the Torah reading. So there is a positive side, and that's from the book of Isaiah. There is a great happening ahead. Israel will soon be restored to Zion, and that has happened. And the capital of Jerusalem has become our home for the American embassy.
Well, let me just share about Isaiah, because Isaiah is one of our greatest prophets. He's the one who gave the world a vision of swords being converted into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks and living at peace. He also is quoted in Isaiah 1:18 as saying, "Come, let us reason together." But if Isaiah is suggesting that just by blindly following the Torah, that's going to get us to where we're trying to go, I'd prefer to use the example of Micah. Micah lived at a time that people were sacrificing animals, and he envisioned a different type of Judaism and a different type of God. And he said, God doesn't want animal sacrifice. That was heresy at the time. But he said, no, that's in the past. God doesn't want sacrifices. What does God want? Only to love mercy, to do justly, and to walk humbly with your God. He innovated. He changed from the past and gave a new vision of God. Not one that wants blood and animal sacrifice, but one that wants our hearts to turn. And that is the key, not by just blindly following, but by constantly progressing and seeing a more loving impression of this power that dwells within you and me.
Rabbi Silver, I know it might be a far-fetched thought, but there was a macrobiotic teacher, Michio Kushi, who says that if we continue to eat animals when they're being slaughtered and the fear is in their adrenaline and we're eating that meat, then we will have that same type of mentality of fear and killing. And to have a one peaceful world, we must become vegetarian or vegan. And that way we're not harming animals, we're not eating that fear that is instilled in the animals as they're going down the pathway to slaughter.
Let me respond to Rabbi Frank with this, and then maybe we can conclude this fascinating discussion. Far-fetched concepts we welcome at L'Dor Va-Dor. So the more far-fetched, the better. That doesn't deter us, and we're happy to entertain far-fetched notions. In fact, like I said, the notion of Micah about doing away with animal sacrifice was very far-fetched. So that's fine. I've been a vegetarian most of my life, and my kids have never eaten meat. And so I espouse your ideology. However, I tend not to preach too much on that, because as strongly as I feel about it, I tend to hedge my bet a little bit, because there's certain practices that people have that are very ingrained. And so I think that maybe eating grain should be ingrained more, and maybe we'd do better off without meat. But I don't like to clobber people over the head with it. I will just suggest this. If you can eat less meat than you are now, you'll be healthier, and the planet will be healthier, and you'll be coming closer to the Jewish ideal expressed in the very beginning in the Garden of Eden and at the end of days. If you can also try to eat meat that doesn't come from a factory farm, you'll be advancing the Jewish cause of Rahmanas and compassion. If you eat eggs that are free range and not the product of chickens that spend their entire life in a little cage, then you're taking a good step forward towards compassion. And if you can try to encourage people and encourage policies that are going to help us to eat more vegetarian food, that would be a good thing. And if you could eventually move to that type of a diet, I think you'll find that you're happier, and that those around you will be happier as well. I encourage you to explore it, but I don't berate people, and try not to be too preachy about it, because I find it sometimes is counterproductive. But I will say this: I do appreciate your passion, Rabbi Frank, which I share. My approach might be a little bit different. I think it's been a great discussion today about Afghanistan and the Torah reading and many other things. It's been a pleasure to be on with you. I'll be in court tomorrow trying to defeat the DeSantis executive order doing away with the mask mandates in the county. So I'm going to run off now and start preparing, or continue to prepare for that. I do encourage you to read my Jewish Journal article and share it with others. Encourage you to come and join us at High Holidays and spread the word. It's going to be really cool, great technology, great music, and we're going to have some innovative messaging. And the most exciting thing is that we're going to all share a discussion about how we can improve our lives, how we can move from where we are to where we could be, how we can maximize our potential. This is a very exciting thing about being Jewish. And by the time we're done with the high holidays, if we do it right, we can be better people than we've ever been before, and truly transcend many of our faults to a better way of living. So thank you, everybody, for sharing and joining us in this broadcast. Thank you, Rabbi Frank, for your words of wisdom. We appreciate your being here. And thank you, everybody else. And thank you, Sharon, for organizing this. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.